It's Monday, June 30th, 2025, and we have a pretty decently sized marginal out here, which stretches from parts of the Midwest into the Ohio Valley and Mid-Atlantic. So this is going to be our area with an increased probability of severe weather, and then really a high probability of just general thunderstorms across much of the United States. The main threat is going to be severe winds out here in our marginal risk area, stretching from parts of the Midwest, Ohio Valley, and into the Mid-Atlantic, and gusts up to 60 miles can be probably expected with these storms. And we have a very isolated 5% risk of hail up here in Wisconsin associated with an area with more deep layer shear, which could possibly increase the strength of those updrafts. And then currently there is no tornado threat outlined by the SPC, but I wouldn't be surprised to see possibly an isolated one out here in parts of Illinois. And then for our day 2 outlook, we also have just a marginal risk of severe weather out here spanning from the northeast and into the mid-Atlantic. So this is kind of signaling a cool down in severe weather for at least a couple of days. So that's definitely good news. Here's our simulated reflectivity for our main risk area up here in the Midwest tomorrow. And we can see we have a bit of a line of storms or mesoscale convective system back here in parts of eastern Nebraska, which will ultimately push forward eastward into the Midwest as we go through the day. And this would be pretty instrumental for our risk of severe weather out here. As we see, this storm is going to pretty much disorganize and cool down, probably bringing some severe gust and a lot of rain out here in parts of Missouri and Iowa in the early morning hours. But as we push forward into today, it's going to deorganize more. And what's going to happen is that this area out here in our main risk area is going to have quite a bit of time to destabilize and build up those storm ingredients. And by the time this mesoscale convective system or remnant low left by our mesoscale convective system and a associated cold front pushes through this area, we could see a couple of scattered multi-cells out here, which is one of the reasons why I believe there could be a isolated weak tornado threat with this. And this is going to occur right around midday. But as we push further into the afternoon hours, we see more scattered convection out here in parts of mostly Illinois, and then possibly a couple of storms up here in Wisconsin, which could pose that hail threat. But these storms down here will pose mostly a wind threat, possibly a very small tornado threat, and then not really much of a risk for hail at all. And then storms further down our cold front, there could actually be an area of increased activity down here near parts of northeastern Oklahoma, northern Arkansas, and southern Missouri, where there is a spinning low, which could possibly fuel those storms. And if this period of some multi-cells can kind of occur during that low-level jet period, that is also when that tornado threat would maximize. But it kind of looks like the timing right now would be a little off and that these storms would be mostly disorganized and linear by the time the low-level jet kicks in. But as we push forward into the night, we see that we have a pretty decent area of storm coverage along our cold front, and it looks like that will continue, but these storms aren't likely going to be severe at this point, with the exception of a couple of clusters, like for example down here in parts of northern Arkansas where that low will be. Out here in the mid-Atlantic and southeast, there's once again going to be a lot of just scattered, unorganized convection out here today, which will be initiated by daytime heating and actually some troughing. Our trough is going to dig pretty deep in, even into the southeast as we go through the day. But out here, an increased area of confidence in some severe weather has been outlined in parts of the lower northeast and upper mid-Atlantic, where these storms will be able to interact with a boundary and that could possibly strengthen them. And pretty much the only threat with these storms are going to be some isolated severe gust. But across this region, like for example further down into the southeast, storms are mostly expected to just be pretty disorganized, but if they can cluster, there could be an isolated threat of severe winds. And this is because, like the days before, we just have a modestly unstable environment with a lot of moisture down here in this region. And the last area I'm going to look at is our southern plains float, where we could see a couple of, interestingly, a little bit more strong storms out here associated with a low in this region. So parts of northern Arkansas, southern Missouri. So really the southmost end of our risk. And also another thing, there looks like there could be an area of increased activity right here on the Mississippi-Alabama border, initiated by daytime heating and some westerly flow, and also an increased area of moisture on that periphery of a high pressure system down here in parts of the Gulf. And then, like always, there is going to be enough moisture out here in the upper plains to initiate a couple of storms, which could possibly bring some high wind gusts, but it's likely going to be short of severe, and it's mostly just going to be a lot of rain out here in this region. Here are our upper air maps, and our trough, like other days, has been kind of hanging out up here in the more northern parts of the United States, so upper central plains and parts of the northern plains, but it looks like on today, it's actually going to dip pretty deep down, and we can see that when storms are actually going to be out here in Illinois, we have a bit of a jet max, which could provide some upper level forcing for these storms and possibly some prefrontal storms out here in Illinois, and also increased deep layer shear up here in parts of Wisconsin, which could fuel that hail threat. But pretty deep troughing, and yeah, the short wave is going to dig somewhat far, even into parts of the southeast, which could help to initiate storms pretty much anywhere along the dip in our jet stream. Then another reason why I think we could see a possibly isolated weak tornado threat out here in parts of Illinois is that our 700 millibar winds are actually going to have a bit of a kind of jet max move through our region, which I could think could possibly fuel a weak tornado threat. And then this is a photograph from that Illinois area where I think we could see an isolated tornado threat, but it's still pretty low. We do see a tad bit of curvature on our photograph. Our low level helicity isn't going to be super high, and our low level shear isn't going to be super high, but if storms can kind of coincide when that low level jet kind of peaks, we could see an increase in the tornado threat. Then our bulk shear is going to be over that 40 knot threshold. So this region has the highest probability of having some organized storms. We do actually see some light veering in our winds, which could also organize storms, and our lowest cloud level is going to be low enough to possibly support that very low tornado threat. And then our mid-level lapse rates are going to be pretty low at 6.7 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer. And even though we do have a tad bit of cape right here near our freezing layer is going to be pretty high, and our mid-level lapse rates are going to be pretty low. So that is a reason why that hail threat is going to be almost zero. We do see quite a bit of moisture out here, which would support that threat for all hazards of severe weather, but it's likely just going to be wind and possibly a tornado or two, but that still doesn't look super likely. And our atmosphere is going to have sufficient CAPE at surpassing 3,000 joules per kilogram and nearing 3,500. Then we have a very high precipitable water air mass out here, 2.11 inches, which could possibly help to fuel that threat for severe winds. Then our 3 CAPE is going to be nearing 200, which could help support that threat of all hazards of severe weather. So possibly a tornado or two, but mostly severe winds and possibly some super small hail, but that also doesn't look super likely either. So in summary, out here in parts of northeastern Illinois, I think we could see a couple of weak tornadoes, maybe a tornado or two. Definitely severe winds, and we're not super likely to see hail, but there could be some small hail. Then here's a look at our National Hurricane Center tropical weather outlook, and we have our second tropical storm of the season out here in the Gulf, Tropical Storm Barry, but this is going to crash right into Mexico, probably very early Monday morning. And then we have a small 10% area of development out here, which kind of spans from parts of the far eastern Gulf across the Florida Peninsula and then into the Atlantic Ocean. This doesn't look super likely to develop, but we're definitely keeping an eye on it. And the last thing we're going to look at is, because we're expecting a cool down in some weather or severe weather for the next couple of days, we're going to take a look at our long-term outlook and see when that next wave of severe weather could be possible. So down here in the deep Gulf or the Bay of Campeche, we can actually see Tropical Storm Barry crashing into Mexico, which will probably happen in the very early hours today. And our pattern out here in the mid-Atlantic of just widespread disorganized thunderstorms and a couple of organized severe storms is likely going to pretty much go away for a couple of days as that trough digs pretty deep into the region. And yeah, pretty much over this entire week, we're not going to see much severe weather before we do see a bit of a trough dig in up here in our northern plains once again, and we could see a return of severe weather in the northern plains into parts of the northern Midwest, possibly next weekend. And then, of course, this will bring some frontal activity over the next couple of days, over the weekend next week, which could bring some severe storms across the state. And it looks like we could actually see a return of our northern plains risk area kind of rejuvenating itself. So even next week on Tuesday, it looks like we see a hint of some troughing up here in Canada, possibly draping a front, bringing some severe weather up here in our northern plains region. And then even really far out, 2 weeks out, it looks like our northern plains region could possibly still be having some severe weather. And it looks like our large rainmakers will return out here in parts of the southeast, mid-Atlantic, and Midwest.